Monday morning, everybody. It is Angie Callen, your host of No More Mondays, the show where we explore the human side of modern work to help you design the career, the business, and most importantly, the life that you love. This episode is brought to you by Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries. It is my new book, and it is out there in the flesh. So if you need a little inspiration to rethink the way you live and work, head on over to scarygoodread.com and grab your copy. Now, let's talk to this guy beside me. Today's guest is Steve. Steve, guess what I forgot to do is ask you how to say your last name. So say your last name.
All right, it's Jaffe.
Okay. It's exactly what I would have said. However, it is always when I forget to ask that I go, should have asked. Steve Jaffe is the author of The Layoff Journey, From Dismissal to Discovery. It is a guide to navigating the stages of grief that often occur after a job loss to help you find clarity, purpose, and move forward to the other side of the event. Steve is a former marketing exec with 25 years of experience and a deep understanding of what it means to lose your job and your identity and recover. And unfortunately, this conversation is really timely. More and more people are experiencing this reality, and I think that's going to become a new normal. And so Steve and I are really going to dig into the psychology of layoffs, the unexpected grief that does come with a career change, but how this can actually unlock something new and be an opportunity for you. So Steve, welcome to No More Mondays.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I got to give you all the quick skinny. We had an entire 18-minute podcast conversation about skiing and outdoor adventure before I hit record. So we'll have to do that as a bonus episode. I wish I had recorded it. And so, Steve and I share a lot of similar perspectives on what it means to like get outside, which is why I'm kind of excited to have this conversation, about layoffs and unexpected career changes, because I think a lot of times, more often than not, layoffs are treated like logistical issue. Right?
Yeah.
Here's your notice. Here's your severance. Holy crap, I got to go find another job. And
Right.
we skip over or forget or diminish the really significant mental, emotional event that this can be. And I know you've talked really openly about the impact of job loss for you, that how it does rattle our identity, our purpose, usually our confidence. And so I would love to hear a little bit just about your story, and particularly what surprised you when you went through your own layoff experience.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. I've been through 4 layoffs throughout my career. Advertising and marketing tends to be a pretty heavily impacted industry when it comes to layoffs. So I've spent the requisite 10,000 hours recovering from the effects of a layoff. And what I learned was that you can derive a lot of self-worth, a lot of your identity in your job and what you do. And when that's taken away from you, you can be left with, oh my God, who am I? What do I do? And start questioning your self-worth, your self-esteem, your confidence takes a big hit, because we wrap so much up in what we do. It becomes who we are. When we meet people at a social gathering, oftentimes people will say, so what do you do? As a way of describing you as this whole person. And you reduce yourself to, well, I'm a VP of marketing for Kellogg's, right? And it becomes a title and a company that you work for. And then people draw all these inferences from that. It's a really reductive way of trying to describe who you are as a person. So if you get laid off and that business card gets taken away, you're left with asking, well, who am I now? What am I? What is my self-worth? How do I define myself? So in my very first layoff, going back to 2001, I struggled with that question pretty extensively. And I had thought that because I was laid off, there was something wrong with me. Like it was my fault almost. And over time, what I learned was that this was a budget exercise that had nothing to do with me. My salary was listed on an Excel spreadsheet somewhere.
You were a line item on a P&L.
I was exactly. And it was easier to cut my salary than to increase sales to drive to the bottom line. So the myth of meritocracy was something I had really bought into.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I worked hard enough. I was smart enough. I got great performance reviews. This should somehow insulate me and protect me from a layoff. But the reality is there is no protection from a layoff.
Mm-hmm.
And you shouldn't read anything into it more than this was a business decision meant to cut revenue because the company needed to survive tough times, right? So all of these things that we use to take a hit to our self-confidence, our self-esteem, um, we should just drop that baggage and walk away from
Yes.
it. Now, easier said than done. But these are the things that I write about in the book.
Yeah.
And I go into the 7 stages of grief that you go through, not just in a layoff, but in any traumatic life experience. If a family member, a friend, a loved one dies, if you go through a divorce, if you go through a bankruptcy, these are the body's emotional and physical way that
Mm.
we as humans process traumatic life events. A layoff is certainly one of them.
Yeah.
So you have a roadmap. You start to understand, okay, this is like known territory. I'm not like experiencing anything that's like new or unusual, which gives some normalcy to it. And you start to move through the stages of grief where you find it maybe as an opportunity
Mm.
to find some recovery, some resilience, where you come out the other side feeling like you've got a new perspective, some new direction, and you've left that experience behind. You don't carry that baggage with you.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to recognize, and you said this, but I really want to call it out, is that a layoff or a heavily negative professional experience is just as traumatic as like losing a loved one when it comes to
Right.
grief. But a lot of times I don't think we identify it as such. And in general, I think that we, just like we diminish ourselves by putting ourselves in the box of I am identified by the label of a title, we also diminish how substantial our career, whether it's business or whether it's employment, is on our overall well-being. And therefore, when that is lost, how significant it can be. And so I would love to get a little bit specific and talk about the stages of grief we go through during these types of professional events, and just maybe like really quickly how they look in this context versus what I think we know a little bit better in the life side. So how does grief look when we are processing it after a negative professional experience?
Yeah. So the 7 stages of grief were created by a wonderful behavioral research scientist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She created them back in the 40s as she was observing terminally ill patients. But they translate and transfer to any of these traumatic life experiences. And they tend to follow these 7 that now I'll talk about them in a linear 1 through 7 way, but they don't necessarily manifest that way. You may get stuck on one over another.
Mm.
You may not experience one at all. You may
Or
experience
you might go
all,
forward and come back, right?
right? Yeah, exactly. You may experience all of them in the same day, or maybe none of them on a particular day. Um, but they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal. And if you think about them, like the first 4 are where there's a lot of really heavy emotional baggage that you're carrying, right?
That's the
And
mess.
yeah. And then the last 3 are where you turn the corner and you kind of start to see the light at the end of the tunnel: acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal. And these are where you for one, you don't want to minimize or ignore the layoff experience. Like
Mhm.
oftentimes you get laid off and you immediately, I think you mentioned, like you turn to this like logistical solution of, okay, I need to find another job now,
Yeah.
which means now I'm going to update my resume. I'm going to start getting interviews. I'm going to start networking and doing all these things. But what happens is you don't process this grief that you're
Uh-huh.
sitting in. So when you do land that job interview, it shows up, it manifests, it becomes this
Yes, it
elephant in the
does.
room. If someone says to you, well, tell me about your last job, why did you leave? And you were laid off, and you're carrying denial, anger, depression, and you haven't processed that, that's going to look very differently than
Mhm.
if you're able to frame that and create a narrative and a storyline that shows you've moved on, it doesn't define you, you've put it behind you, and you're ready to move forward. So, one of the things I talk a lot about is to be successful in the job hunt, it's really important to acknowledge and accept and process these emotions,
Mhm.
because it'll set you up for success. It'll change your storyline,
Yeah.
your narrative that one, you're telling about yourself to yourself, but then that you're telling to others as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I say this, I love you say things in a different way that I have said for years. And this is the kind of stuff, the way I have often put that is this is the stuff that subconsciously goes to the interview that you
Mhm.
don't know is going to the interview, but for some reason your interviewers can sniff out, right? And I think the most important thing you said, Steve, is getting to the point where you truly do believe and know that a
Mhm.
layoff is not a reflection of your worth and value to somewhere else. It was simply a business decision. And I
Mhm.
think that's hard because yes, we know it's a business decision, but mentally and emotionally, it is personal for us. And if you don't
Mhm.
allow yourself space to process that, it's going to manifest itself as in a really ugly way. I think career PTSD is a thing. And these are the types of instances that create it because we don't give ourselves the freedom and the bandwidth to kind of like lean into it, process it, and get to the other side so that we can go to that interview as the confident person who has value versus the anxious, oh crap, when are they going to ask me and what
Mhm.
am I going to say? And so I'm
Mhm.
curious with all that in mind and these 7 steps, knowing there's like 4 that are messy and 3 that are post turn the corner. Where do
Mhm.
you see people getting stuck most often?
That's such a good question. People ask me that question a lot, and here's my answer, and it's not meant to be trite. Everybody's life experience is unique, and everybody carries their own stuff into this. So, like for me, I got hung up on depression. Other
Yeah.
people, they may get hung up in anger or bargaining. They may get hung up in denial. I don't think it's a one size fits all. I
Mm,
think it depends on where you are in your life and your life experience and where you like emotionally have vulnerabilities.
yeah.
Um, for me, I really got hung up in, oh my God, what does it say about me? Somehow I took it as a personal failure. It created a lot of self doubt. My self esteem took a big hit, and I wasn't able to properly frame it as, look, you've done nothing wrong. This wasn't your fault, and you're not defined by what happened to you. You're defined by what you do next and how you react to this. So, you know, I saw it as a big roadblock. I didn't see it as merely a detour. And
Mm,
it was that reframing. So in that first layoff that I talked about in 2001, um, it took me a couple of years to fully recover. By the time I hit my fourth layoff in 2023, I sailed right through it. It was like water off a duck's back. And that was when I realized, you know what? There's a big difference here in how I'm processing this. I've learned a set of skills that I think could be valuable to others that are going through this themselves. And there really aren't any other books out there that talk about the grief side of layoff. Every other
yeah.
book just picks right up with, okay, you've been laid off. Here's how you do your resume. Here's how you do your
Yeah.
job
It's
interviewing.
tactical.
Right. It's very tactical.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that says, whoa, wait a minute, pause. Before you do that, you're going through a lot of grief and emotion here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a step to process that. So I saw an opportunity to help others and to take the roadmap that I learned and to use it as like a practical guide that folks could say, yeah, you know what, I'm going through this. I feel this.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes the roadmap going forward.
Yeah. We don't talk enough about the mental, emotional toll that job searching and that layoffs
Mhm.
take on us. And it's funny that you said, Steve is the layoff outlier here. right? The 10,000 hours, by the time you got to the fourth one, it really did roll off your back. And I think part of that's because you really did come to believe and know that the failure that you feel you are when you get laid off is actually just an event and a moment and not a definition of you. And what's funny is there's this little book where I talk about how failure is an instant and a human cannot be a failure. So there you go.
Yeah.
If you feel like layoff is defining you as a failure, there's a little chapter in here you might need to read, which comes back to this kind of idea of like our shared experiences and what people can learn from them. And so, not to put you on the spot, but Steve, the layoff outlier, I'd like to put you on the spot. Let's give everybody out there a little bit of wisdom and inspiration. What do you want to say to somebody who's stuck in one of those first four phases and is in this messy middle of a layoff and is trying to move forward and find their sense of self? What do you say to them?
Oh goodness, let's go through three of these steps real quick, and just a couple of maybe sound bites. If you're stuck in shock and denial, acknowledge what happened. Don't ignore it or minimize it. Accepting that this is a real situation is really the first step. You're gonna feel angry. You're gonna be angry. You want to channel it productively. Give yourself the permission to feel angry. It's normal, but don't let it consume you. Find a healthy outlet. And when you get to the point where you're bargaining with yourself and you're kind of bargaining with that company that you've just been laid off from, and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, what could I have done differently? How could I have handled the situation differently? What could I have done that would have protected me from this layoff? I would ask you to drop that kind of tug of war and ask you to change the question from asking yourself, what if, to what's next. Stop replaying the past. And instead of obsessing over if only I had, reframe your focus to the future possibilities of what comes next. So stop asking what happened and start thinking what's next.
Less what if and more what if.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes a layoff can be a blessing in disguise.
Blessing in disguise, 100%.
Sometimes
and I actually think most people would tell you that is the case once they get to step 5.
Yeah. You have to get through it. In the moment, you're not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But when you do get to the other side, oftentimes layoffs can lead to something better. You just have to be open to that opportunity and open to that possibility and open to what the experience is or can teach you. I do believe in a learning and a growth mindset, and there's a lot that can be had from the time between your layoff and when you land that next job. You can use as an opportunity for some introspection, some learning, understanding your passions, your values, what you enjoy, and understanding if your career path isn't aligned with that. Understanding, are you on a career path that is experiencing contraction? Is the reason for your layoff because of new technology, new advances like AI that's causing the elimination of many jobs? Do you need to pivot to insulate yourself from future layoffs? Do you need to reskill, upskill, learn the transferable skills that you can put on a resume so that you are able to insulate yourself from a future layoff by transferring into a different career path? These are all things
I want to jump in because this takes us all the way back to the very beginning of our conversation. And by the way, I did not plan to have this many shameless plugs, but Steve and I live on the same side, on two sides of the same scary good coin, because this is the opportunity that you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the cocktail party and rethink your response to, so what do you do? Because if you have over-identified or singularly identified with what you do for work, all of your identity is lost in a layoff. And now, instead of reacting and going and finding the new thing, what Steve's talking about is the ability to reflect and essentially re-identify completely with who you are as a human instead of just what you do. And all of that can drastically change how you look at these circumstances. I would guess, Steve, that by number 4, when the water was rolling off the duck's back, it was because your job was in one lane and Steve the human was in a completely other lane and knew exactly what your values are and what was important to you. And so it wasn't as big of an impact because you still knew who you were and had an identity beyond that label. Soapbox.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The first layoff, I had nothing outside of work. I had no work-life balance. I was solely invested in what I did. It became who I was. And when that was taken away, everything was taken away from me. By the time I had my fourth layoff, I had built a whole life and identity and passions and pursuits outside of work so that when the job was taken away, it didn't have anywhere near the same implications or meaning. I still was who I was, and it was not a declarative statement on like me as a person or my abilities. And that was a real defining moment and a point of separation. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. I love this that we're on because look at that. That was one of 3 or 4 sound bites you were going to offer, and look how meaty it was. So let's move on to, I think that was denial, right? So now so we're talking to those of you out there struggling with this. And even if you're not struggling with this, chances are you will face a career crisis of some sort. And so listen, even if you're not laid off, what's your next piece of advice for everybody out there?
Prioritize self-care and mental health. This is a top priority. Find some structure. One of the things that people struggle with a lot after a layoff is the removal of that structure. You have, you wake up, you go do something, it fills your day, and all of a sudden the whole day is open to you. Yes, you need to apply to jobs. Yes, you need to update your resume, but that shouldn't become, your 8 or 9 hours that you're doing every day. You should find a place for a daily routine that has a structure that includes the job search, but also some time for some social networking, right? Some exercise, getting those endorphins and dopamine, serotonin firing, some fresh air. Reach out for support. The networking here is really important. 40% of all Americans have been laid off at least once, which means you probably know somebody that's been laid off. But the thing is, a lot of people don't talk about it because they're experiencing this shame and embarrassment. The more you talk about it, the more you're going to find community and support, and those folks that then will help you land that next job. Most of the jobs that people are going to land aren't going to come from the resume boards and the job boards where there's like thousands of applicants these days getting screened through ATS. You're going to find your job through your network, where you're going to have a personal connection. You need to lean into that, but you can't be afraid out of shame or embarrassment to communicate your experience. It's really important. And find a way to celebrate some small wins. You're going to have setbacks, right? The job hunt these days is filled with setbacks. Yet another reason to process this grief before you start the job hunt, because you're going to get, for 100 resumes you submit, you're probably going to get 99 rejections. The one interview you go on, you're probably going to get ghosted. It takes some,
and this is like not negative stuff, everybody. This is statistically speaking. Right now, the callback rate on cold applications is 1 in 100. And what I tell people all the time is there one certainty in job searching, it is that you will get ghosted. And so this isn't coming from a negative place. It's the reality of the more resilient you can be after a layoff, the better off you're going to be to weather the storm to find your next role.
Exactly. This is like the tough conversation, the honest friend moment of what lays ahead. It used to be you'd be out of work for 6 months. Now you might be out of work for 12 months. It's a tough road. So all the more reason to create this kind of healthy coping skill like you mentioned, resilience, grit, tenacity. You're going to get knocked down 8 times. It's going to be up to you to stand up the ninth time.
Yep.
So what you're doing here is you're creating a self-care practice that's going to help you navigate the stages of grief after the job loss, but also the upcoming grief from, oh my God, I was perfect for that job and they never called me, because that's going to hurt too. And you're gonna need to be able to manage and cope with all of those.
Yeah. And I would even add all of those skills are very valuable as a professional and as a leader in a role, because those are all very human skills. And what one of the things that we talk about here is where is the workforce going, and what's the
Mhm.
future? And in my opinion, human skills are going to become increasingly valuable. And so if you are a more resilient leader, if you allow things to kind of roll off your back a little bit more, you've also made yourself even more insulated from layoffs and likely lowered your stress in the environment. And so there's actual long-term benefits to working through the emotional mental toll of the event so that you can proactively reset and recover instead of react, and all of that
Mhm.
builds a stronger system once you're in your next role. And so it's a beautiful cycle that kind of perpetuates itself in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which actually brings us to something else I was going to ask you. So as we think about this future, I also think that this layoff situation that we're seeing now and that we've seen for the last few years is going to become it's a new normal, right? Like I think the, Amazon layoffs a week or two ago are not an event in my opinion. I think that's going to become a rolling factor, and so I think that the 40% of people who've been laid off is probably going to become 50, 60, 70 over time. And so I'm curious, not from like an upskilling perspective, but more from like a mental emotional perspective. What can we as professionals do to navigate this type of change that we know is likely to be consistent?
Yeah. I think understanding the separation of your person and your identity from what you do when you go to work. You're bringing them your set of skills, and you're loaning that to them certain period of time each day. And you take those skills with you when you leave that job at night, and you take those skills with you if you leave the job from a layoff. Those are transferable skills that go with you anywhere at any time. So, like, own what you bring to the table, because it's going to be what you bring to the table to the next job. Um, the the new reality, there was just I just wrote about this on my blog. We're in an age of um, um, perpetual layoffs. It used to be a company might have layoffs once a year. It would be,
Mm-hmm.
a 20% reduction in force, and that would kind of right size the books for 12 months. Now what you're seeing are companies are doing these smaller layoffs throughout the
Mm-hmm.
year to kind of diffuse the pain, but also to diffuse the press and like the brand impact and,
Yep.
and the brand perception impact and all that. So not to mention, the layoffs that just occurred in January were the highest number of layoffs since 2009.
Uh-huh.
And there's also the fewest number of job postings from 2009. So the highest number of layoffs with the highest or the fewest number of new job openings mean people are unemployed longer than ever in
Yep.
greater numbers than
Yeah.
we've seen for a very long time. It is a new reality. Um, the investment that you can make in yourself, in finding that side gig, that side hustle, in finding where you can own
Mm-hmm.
your skills and what you bring, and make yourself not reliant on others
Mm-hmm.
is very important, because these days the job can get taken from you at any time, but what you have and what you own and what you do is truly yours.
you control that. And I think that's a really important thing to think about is we do have more agency and control in our career than we think or than we feel because of the fact that we can't control the layoff. But if you've kind of diversified yourself a little bit, you have, you have some levers to pull so that now you have, reduced the impact of a layoff just a little bit, emotionally, mentally, and maybe even financially. And so I feel like, as we look at the future of work, rolling layoffs are totally going to be perpetual rolling layoffs are going to
Mhm.
be a new normal.
Mhm.
And because of that, I believe we have moved beyond everyone has one job.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so if you're still in that mode, maybe it's time to start thinking about your diversification strategy. And Steve's got some good resources for you to do that. So speaking of investing in yourself, how do we invest in ourselves via your knowledge and even maybe buy your book? Where do we find you?
Yeah, you can find my book at any bookstore. It might be easiest to find it on Amazon. So go to Amazon, just type in the Layoff Journey. You can find my book there. You can find me on thestevejaffe.com. There's a free chapter there. So if you like what you hear, but you want to take it for a test drive before you buy it, you can get the free chapter. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram. I have a blog on Substack. So plenty of content, plenty of opportunities to connect. The book is a practical guide to navigating these stages of grief after a job loss. So if you're in the thick of it and you're not quite sure what to do next, it's a quick read. So it's a little bit like a life preserver. It's not like this, long
Yeah.
PhD written diatribe. It's real, and it can and will help through a really difficult time.
I think the important thing here is you don't have to do any of this alone. And
Mhm.
whether it's a coach, whether it's leaning into Steve's story to know that somebody else has been through this hard stuff, people can't help you if they don't know what's going on. Now, does that mean you need to blast it from the rooftops and go on alert and start posting desperation on LinkedIn? Please no. Please no. That's not the place to do it. However, there's a lot of places to find community. And what I love about what you're doing, Steve, is the fact that you're supporting people in this place through something very intimately and have experienced, and also have the proof that even the hardest, most unexpected disruptions provide room for clarity, purpose, reinvention, and helping others do what you have come through. And that's what I think is so incredible, and why I encourage all of you out there who either want to prepare yourselves for a future layoff or who are going through it right now in this tough time. Steve mentioned numbers. That's why this is such a timely conversation. I recommend you go get it. So if you're listening out in podcast land, links are in show notes. And if you're listening here on LinkedIn, we will drop, we will drop in comments. And here Steve and I go sharing our two sides of the very same scary good coin, right? We got two people that are proof you will survive. Life can happen for you if you let it. And so, Steve, as we say goodbye, everybody, I want to ask you kind of one more question related to some of this future of work stuff we've been talking
Mhm.
about. If all of these things that you and I are forecasting come true, what do you think the future of work looks like? And most importantly, what do you think we humans can do to set ourselves up for success as we navigate it?
Well, great question. I think AI is here to stay. It's only going to get bigger and bigger. Here's the thing about AI: it will never have a creative thought on its own. Um,
Bingo.
AI will only iterate on stuff that's already been done.
Yep.
So if you have a creative thought, if you have a creative way of thinking, of looking at something differently, um, that is where everybody should lean in. You won't have redundancy on creative thinking. Creative thinking will be the new currency. Everyone will be looking for original creative thought,
Yep.
and that is what's going to be in jeopardy going forward. So um,
Absolutely.
find what you bring that's unique, and find an outlet to express that.
Go all in on your human. And I'm actually going to recall an episode we aired a few weeks ago with Lori Seymour, where we talk about creative intelligence and exactly this concept of how AI can never replace the like infinite wisdom we as humans have, it can actually enable it in many ways. But I think Steve brings up a really good point that if you want to kind of future-proof yourself, go all in on the thing that makes you a very unique, amazing human that you are.
Yeah.
There you go. How's that to wrap up a pretty incredible episode?
I
Steve
love
Jaffe,
it.
everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I love it.
This is such a good story. I really love people that are vulnerable about the crap they go through and what they've
Yeah.
learned and are helping others just navigate it, right? And so I hope this provided a new perspective on what job loss could mean if you let it, and where it can lead if you give yourself the space to grieve, reflect, and grow through it, not in spite of it. And so whether you're navigating a transition, thinking about your next move, or just trying to feel a little bit more human in your work, I hope this conversation helped you feel a little bit more seen and hopeful. So thanks again to Steve Jaffe for being here. Thank you all for listening to No More Mondays. I will see you next week for another episode.